Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. I've got another Master Duel video for you all. So today we are going to be doing one of our tier lists, but I thought it would be fun to talk about past Master Duel formats and kind of rank them a bit here on a tier list. So because of the nature of the images I'm going to use, the nature of how I'm doing this is a little bit different. I wanted to make the images a little bit bigger and show up more clearly on the tier list. So yeah, you're not seeing them yet, but I'll be putting them up one by one. I have taken the previous Master Duel metas, gone through them, taken a look, and was able to break them up into 10 pretty distinct groups, which again, we are going to be ranking here today. Now, keep in mind, this is going to be exclusive to Master Duel. I am kind of thinking about doing another one of these videos, maybe for like TCG metas, but the problem with that is that I really only played the TCG. I say only. I played it from like 2002, 2003 to about like 2016, like summer 2016, pretty much right before Zodiacs and then Master Duel 4 is when I quit. So couldn't really speak to any TCG metas beyond that. But Master Duel formats, I of course have been extremely active playing this game just about every single day since its release. So this I can definitely speak to with a lot more authority. So we're going to go from the first Master Duel format and then work our way up to the current one. So let's go ahead and start with format number one. That is going to be the kind of Drytron, Trizu, Eldritch Virtual World meta. This was the format that we saw for seasons 1 through 4 and the beginning of season 5 as well, as it actually took quite a while for Master Duel to start getting like its like new packs introduced. We had like 4 months of the same meta, which is why I don't really remember this one too fondly, to be super honest, and I don't think a lot of people do. There was just a lot of clamor at this point of like, you know, when is Master Duel going to drop new content? Like, for a minute there, I was honestly a little scared that this was going to be yet another Yu-Gi-Oh game that was kind of like, just going to like, not get supported. Konami has this pretty bad habit of making Yu-Gi-Oh like online simulators and they're just never updating them, and that was definitely the fear for a minute there with Master Duel as well. Honestly, the other thing that made this meta not super great was just how unfun it was to play against Drytron and Eldritch, specifically at a time when the coin flip could be abused. The way this works is, you know, in these first few months of Master Duel, when the coin got flipped, right? If you lost the coin flip, before the duel actually started, you could just quit out of the application, like real quick. You just close out of the game and then reopen it, and you wouldn't get a penalty for that, like at all. So you could literally just ensure that you always won the coin flip, which when you were either turboing out a Herald of Perfection or just a Herald in general. I don't remember the level 6 one's name off the top of my head, but it's Herald of Perfection, Herald of Ultimateness is the level 12 one. Regardless, you turbo out a Herald and a bunch of fairies, or you turbo out a bunch of floodgates, or you turbo out a VFD, or you be the one meta deck that actually played fair. Yeah, no, I had a ton of fun like getting back into the swing of Yu-Gi-Oh! And playing Trizu initially, like when Master Duel first came out, but I will say as this meta, this initial meta wore on, it was like very much desperate for new content, new cards, just something to freshen up the game. Honestly, looking back, don't have like necessarily the fondest memories. I think I'm going to end up actually putting this in F tier, and this might be a little bit controversial. I don't know like if people have like a fondness towards this first metagame of Master Duel, but like the meta itself was okay. Like the first couple of weeks were great. Like obviously everyone was like just getting into the swing of things. You know, trying to get a handle on this like particular rule set, like as far as cards being legal, but ultimately it just lasted too long, and once the meta was like solved, it wasn't like a super great one. Alright, so after that in season 5 we had our first big shakeup, and our next format here is going to be the one just after format, well not just after, because again this lasted like 4 months, but Season 5, Diamond Rank got introduced, and we got our first major update with the addition of not only Sword Souls, but also DPE came in this pack. The Sword Souls and DPE came at the same time, and that brought up Phantom Knights to see quite a bit of play as well. Trizu was definitely still hanging in there, and Virtual World was still very relevant. The Drytron deck had lost the, what was it? I can never remember the Ritual Monster's name, but the level 6 one, it got limited, so they lost 2 copies of that and took a huge consistency hit. Eldritch was still very much around in this meta, but you know, due to Sword Soul and DPE in general just boosting a lot of different decks, you didn't see quite as much of it. So this meta was great because, you know, as I mentioned before, the first meta kind of dragged on for quite a while. And when Sword Souls and DP got introduced, it was very much a breath of fresh air. Sword Souls were super cool to get into, very, very fun. I remember like play testing them and realizing like, oh, this deck is going to be so much fun to play. And Sword Souls were a fantastic first edition of the game, as they are still debatably somewhat meta-relevant now, but were very much meta-relevant pretty much right until Tier Limits came out. So this meta, I definitely remember a lot more fondly again for how it just generally shook things up. I'm just going to make sure these are like roughly the same size here. But yeah, I think as far as this one goes, I'm going to go ahead and put this in B tier. You know, the meta, like, it was still missing a bit, like, looking back. Like, I definitely think once the adventure stuff came in, things really got a lot more fun. But Sword Souls and DPE were enough of a shakeup that we at the very least saw like different decks doing well, and Drytron wasn't like a mainstay force anymore, so that was definitely nice as well, especially after, I remember that first season where Diamond got introduced, season 5, right? It was like this huge, I was on this huge push to get to Diamond 1 before Sword Souls came out, but that meant fighting through Drytron hell, because Diamond at that point was just full of Drytron decks. Playing Tri-Z was it was definitely a challenge. It was quite the gauntlet to have to go through. So to get on the other side of that, to have Sword Soul and DP was a lot of fun. And as I mentioned, what followed that ended up being the adventure engine. So let's go ahead and drop this next little graphic here, which is going to display a lot of the top decks at the time. We have Prank Kids with the adventure package and DP. We all remember adventure pranks. So I have Water Enchantress here. This is just to generally represent like Halcyon piles. We all remember the combos, right, with Halky Fibrax and Aurora Dawn, and a lot of people didn't like that meta for that reason, because that deck was running so rampant. Here's the thing, though. I'm going to make a controversial statement and a controversial tier placement, but before I do, you could probably already guess what it is, but before I do, I just want to remind everyone, this tier list is based purely off of my own opinion of how much fun I had during each given meta. You can't really rank formats objectively, because how quote-unquote good they were is entirely subjective, so keep that in mind when I say this. I had a ton of fun during this format, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and put it in S tier. That's how much fun I had playing during this meta. A lot of people did not like the Halky Fibrax Auroradon decks. I definitely understand that. A lot of people at the time also really did not like Adventure Prank Kids, but looking back, like, Adventure Prank Kids was such a fair top deck, like, in the grand scheme of things. Like, the Halcyon piles did not see as much consistent success as the Adventure Prank Kid decks did, but Adventure Prank Kid decks definitely felt a lot more fair than Halcyon. Now, they weren't as fair at the time. At the time, there were like a lot of strategies that were just like just below that level, just to the point where they couldn't keep up. But looking forward into, like, in the next format we're going to look at is when Branded Despia was introduced, and really even from that point forward, retroactively, like, Adventure Prank Kids would have totally been fine in those metas. Like, I don't know, maybe Meow Meow Moo, maybe I'm just arguing that Meow Meow Moo did not need to go to 1. I kind of don't think it did, honestly. It's still wild to me that the card got banned, and I think still is banned in the TCG. I think Prank Kids are definitely kind of, like, not past the prime of when they're good. They're still fine, like, as a deck, but I don't think they're going to be, like, meta-relevant if they get more copies of Meow Meow Moo. And I also, like I was saying, I think that was generally the case moving forward as well. Hulk absolutely needed to go. As much as I love Halcyon piles, Halky Fibrax absolutely had to go. But, I don't know. I think as a whole, this meta, I had a lot of fun playing during it. I had a ton of fun with pile decks. You know how much I love pile decks, and this format was like peak pile decks. I loved it. Alright, the next format, as I already touched on, is going to be the one where Branded Despia got introduced. So, This was when, well, not, there were branded and Despia cards already out before then, but this is when, like, branded Fusion, right? That's when those kind of decks came out. So, yeah, branded Despia decks as we know them, I should say. This is when those came out. So, this was quite the shakeup. This also came off the heels of, I believe, Hulk getting banned and Meow Meow Moo going to 1. So, like, this format in the grand scheme of things was honestly relatively short-lived, and like, I do agree that the decks had to be cycled out at some point, but I would have liked to see like a little bit more playtime with decks like this. This meta was alright. I mean, it was a decent shakeup. A lot of people welcomed it because, again, a lot of people did not like the Hulk Dawn pile decks. Dragon Link became a bit more of a thing during this meta. Flouanderies, we started seeing that be played a bit more often here. For this format, it was alright. I guess Branded Destiny was fun when it became a thing. I'll put it in B tier. I'll put it a little bit below this one, though, but I think this was a fine meta that we had here. Alright, next one's going to be a little bit different, but I thought that this was still distinct enough that I wanted to bring it into the limelight here. So, the next format I'm going to talk about is like post-Cosmic Oceans. And Cosmic Oceans was one of those packs that when I initially looked at it, I was like, oh, this is our bad pack for this rotation. But looking back, it had more impact than I expected. Particularly Marinesis ended up being a lot better than I thought. Like, just looking back at my old meta reports, there were so many where Marinesis was relevant as a tier 3, and actually at one point even a tier 2 deck. Like, Marinesis, like, it was really more than most people were playing it shortly after the deck came out, but it was putting up enough good results that it could be considered a tier 2 deck at the time. Yumi Control was also like kind of a thing, but not quite as much, but it was still fine. Still fairly represented in the meta. This one, though, I didn't feel was like super distinct from the previous format, other than like, you know, you had to be more conscious of your deck having an out to towers because Marinesis was running around quite a bit more. And yeah, all in all, I mean, it was an okay meta. I didn't really get anything out of Cosmic Ocean myself, though, so I'm going to put it down here in C tier. You know, obviously people who are like Marinesis diehards would have put this format in S tier. If you were on Marinesis, this was the meta for you. But again, Cosmic Oceans didn't particularly interest me, so I was kind of bleh on that meta. I'll put it in C tier there. Okay, we are halfway through. We have a total of 10 different formats that we're going to rank, and we have gotten through 5 of them. Let's move on to format number 6. So this was a format that I think, similarly to the Hulk Dawn Pile format, was not looked back upon very well by a lot of people, and it's going to be for a different reason, though. This was the meta when Runic actually got introduced. So it's interesting, right? When this selection pack came out, I was mainly focused on Labyrinth because Runic didn't really put up many results in the TCG or OCG, like, up to this point. Like, even at the point where they were coming out in Master Duel. Like, Runic Sprite wasn't really a thing yet. I don't even know if Sprites were a thing yet, honestly. I think they were just coming out, but Runic Sprite wasn't really a thing. And again, you didn't see them in the OCG, so, like, when this pack came out, I was like, oh, Labyrinth. And I guess I'll get Runic stuff, but Runic proved very quickly to, like, overtake Eldritch as the floodgate deck of choice. And indeed, even though we've seen Eldritch quite a bit in these, like, infographics, like, representing each individual format, we're not going to be seeing Eldritch anymore because Runic absolutely just demolished Eldritch as the floodgate deck of choice moving forward. This one, honestly, for me, is going to fall right in line with the previous one where Cosmic Ocean came out. Although, this might be a little controversial, but I think it was actually a little bit more fun. Like, I don't know, Runics were at least different. I thought Runics were, and I still think Runics are now, an interesting archetype. A lot of people don't like Runics because they don't like Floodgate decks and they don't like Mill decks, and it's valid not to like playing against either of those decks, but Runic as an archetype I thought was interesting, like, functionally. It's the first time we've seen a Mill archetype actually be, like, good, prevalent, and, like, just a mill strategy as far as milling your opponent out. It's the first time we've seen it really viable outside of turbo mill decks like Empty Jar, which are kind of just another brand of like another variant of OTK decks, but this is the first time we've seen a true, like, dedicated, steady mill strategy actually have a lot of success, and for that reason, I thought it was, again, a little bit more interesting. Still not one of my favorite metas, but I didn't hate it quite as much as a lot of people did. And it's funny, like, I think some people have this idea that I am, like, a Runic apologist because I don't hate it, and this has always been the case. Like, I don't particularly like Runic, I just don't viscerally hate it like everybody else does, but I have already spoken my piece on that, and Runic's not really relevant, honestly, in Master Duel at this point anyway, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Let's move on to the next format. This format, this is actually going to probably end up just being the top of the tier list, the one that followed the Runic format. Format number 7 that we're going to talk about here, this was when there was a selection pack that came out around this time. I think it had Dinomorphia stuff in it, but the main thing that actually happened here, an even bigger impact release, was the update to the secret pack that contained both Sky Striker and Math Mech cards, as we got Sky Striker Mobilize Engage and Math Mech Circular. So, as I already alluded to, I'm just going to go ahead and throw this at the top of the tier list. I think to date, this has been my favorite meta of Master Duel. It was unfortunately also one of the shorter ones. I don't think this was even quite a full month. It was like barely 4 weeks that this was like the meta before Sprites came out. This, like, again, pre-Sprite but post-Math Mech meta. I love Math Mech. Math Mech is a super cool deck. It was very skill testing. It was a ton of fun to play. I'm a little biased because this was also when I got my MCS top with Math Mech, but the meta as a whole felt super wide open. I think this was one of the most wide open metas I felt like we had, like, in all of Master Duel. The only ones you could argue that were more wide open were, I think, our first format, like in the first week, specifically when people were still figuring things out. Again, once this format got solved, I kind of thought it was ass, but then the other time I think the meta really opened up was when Sword Soul and DPE came out, but pre-adventure stuff. Now, I thought the pre-adventure format was, or the post-adventure format was more fun, but in terms of just like number of decks that were available and they were all roughly around the same power level, it's these two for me. Honestly, I think that might be enough to convince me to move this up to A tier. Like, this was actually, looking back, a very well-balanced meta, especially everything that was legal at the time. I think this was a meta where initially a lot of people were complaining about Sword Soul and DPE, but, like, if we could go back in time, I think a lot of us would very much welcome this meta, this post-Sword Soul DPE but pre-adventure meta. But I still think, for me, honestly, the Math Mech meta beats that out. That format was so much fun. Math Mech, again, loved that as a deck. Sky Striker was like the most viable it's ever been in Master Duel at that time. And again, a ton of decks were viable. A lot of people say, like, yeah, but there were still Runics, but whatever. Runics were like already like tier 3 and declining into Rogue at that point. And a lot of people will disagree with me on that. But pure Stun Runic might have debuted as a tier 2 deck, but it like slid downhill from there. And just like, yeah, didn't really hold up, so. Alright, next format number 8 out of 10. This is going to be the Sprite Meta. So this was when Sprites came out. I actually had a ton of fun during this meta, I'm not going to lie. I was really looking forward to Sprites coming out, and honestly, there was a lot of just attention, or not attention, what's the word I'm looking for? There were a lot of good numbers for the channel during this time. I don't usually like to talk about that in my videos, like the metrics, like as far as YouTube goes, but I will say this, when Sprites initially came out that first week, I had like, I think probably the biggest spike in like subscribers and overall views that I've ever had. A lot of people were really excited for this meta, some people not so much. Some people were like, Sprites, like, you know, like Sprites are going to be the end times, but the format ended up being fairly diverse. I do have Runic here, but this is more to represent Runic Sprite. Same with Twins, this is more to represent Twin Sprite. And to be fair, as things panned out, Twin Sprite kind of phased out, and you could arguably put Sword Soul Tenyi here. Runic Sprite, I do think, was kind of the bane of this meta, and this is an instance where I will say I was not like super fond of Runics, and I do think they were a little too powerful, was when they were exactly paired up with Sprite. During the end of this format, like right before the next format, we were seeing Runic Sprite have some of like the most representation of any meta deck up to this point in any given meta. So I do think once it got solved more, it got less fun. But I think overall this meta was like pretty fun. I am gonna put it, I'm gonna put it in B tier, but I'm gonna put it above, what is it called? I'm gonna put it above the, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. I accidentally shifted the background there. I meant to readjust the size of this. Yeah, I liked it a little bit more than like the branded fusion format. I kind of want to put it in E tier, but that's honestly mostly fond memories just from how well again the channel was doing. If I'm thinking purely from how much, honestly, no, I will put it in E tier in terms of how much fun I was having during that meta. I don't think the meta was quite as wide open as like this format 2 here, when again Sword Soul and DP got introduced, but I don't know, sprites, like, they were exciting, and I think a lot of people were really excited to play them, and I was very much excited to play them, so I'll go ahead and put it there. Alright, 2 more metas to go over here. Next one's going to be format number 9. This is one of the ones that was like, I was kind of on the fence on, kind of like with the Cosmic Ocean meta. I was like, was this really distinct enough? But I think it was. This is specifically post-Ishizu, but pre-tier limits meta. This is the most recent one before the one that we are currently in. So this is when, like, those Ishizu pile decks were big, whether it was with Emancipators, Dragon Link, Despia cards, or most notably the Ishizu Chaos piles that would deck you out with Necroface. As far as this meta went, I don't know. It was... I like pile decks, but it definitely wasn't as fun as the Halcdon piles. I still think the Ishizu piles were cool. It's really just the Necroface mill one that was kind of gross, and I think were it not for that particular pile deck's existence, we might have seen more, like, cool pile decks come out of the meta. I think I gotta give this one a pretty solid B tier. I think it's about the same as me as the initial branded fusion meta was, but I'll rank it just a little bit lower. It's, I don't know, it's interesting, right? Oops, I accidentally shifted the background again. There we go. It's interesting, right? Because the Ishizus coming out before the tier limits did actually open up some decks that weren't really a thing in the TCG and OCG, because of course tier limits came out before Ishizu cards in that case, but it was like one of those things where it was really interesting at first to see what was going to happen, but then it kind of turned out like the best thing that happened was still a pretty unfun deck to play against, so it was kind of like, I don't know. It was just kind of, it was alright. It's like, you know, it's in the middle here on B, and it's like in the middle sandwich between all these other ones. It's very much a middle-of-the-road format as far as I'm concerned. And finally, for our 10th format, we have the current meta. This is the only one I chose to represent with 3 decks, and I chose to have one of those decks be bigger than the others, unlike any of these other metas, and I think you can probably understand why. This is our current meta, the first tier 0, I keep doing that, I keep dragging the background, the first tier 0 deck of Master Duel, the tier limits meta. I also have Flaunderies and Exorcister represented here, mostly to represent not only themselves, but also pretty much every other deck, which is mostly in some way, shape, or form playing some kind of tech to beat out tier limits. So what do I think of this current meta? Ooh, this is interesting, right? I've alluded to this before, but as far as the current metagame goes, I very much have a mixed opinion on it. On one hand, I will say, as someone who is playing tier limits, that the mirror match is quite fun. I know a lot of people who don't like tier limits are really sick of people saying that, but you might be, you know, a bit at ease to hear me say this as well. Tier mirrors, super fun. But at the same time, I also really personally value deck diversity in any given format, right? It's a lot of the reasons why, again, I lauded the Math Mech format so highly, as well as the post-Sword Soul, but pre-Adventure format, because these 2 metas in particular felt super wide open. This, honestly, I think in most cases would just be an S tier, but again, I just really happen to like the Halcdon piles, which a lot of people didn't, but I did, so I put that in S tier. So as far as deck diversity goes, this is definitely an F tier format. But I think the tier limits are a lot of fun. I like playing with and against, and playing with the deck against the deck. I think it is very challenging, and I appreciate that about it. I enjoy challenging metas. I think this is generally the case for a lot of tier 0 metas, right? Because I've lived a lot of tier 0 metas. I lived through Teledad. I lived through, you could argue, Dragon Ruler. I kind of lived through Pepe, although I was kind of like not paying as much attention to the game during that time, but it's pretty much the same across the board, right? People who played the tier 0 deck remember it fondly because tier 0 mirror matches tend to be, not always, but tend to be fairly skill testing. People who didn't play the deck don't remember the format fondly because, well, the tier 0 deck just pushed them out of the meta. This is one where I'm, again, very split. Even now, I kind of find myself struggling of where exactly I want to put this. I don't know, because, like, part of me just wants to put it in B, but then there's a part of me that's like, come on, have an opinion, Lex. I'm going to put it in an A tier, I think. I'm going to put it in an A tier, but I'm going to put it below Sprites, because when it comes to decks that I was, like, most eagerly anticipating and most excited for, tier limits were pretty close to Sprite for me in that regard, and I have had a lot of fun playing tier limit matches, mirror matches, as I've said thus far. But it's not like, I wouldn't laud it as an S tier format, right? I don't think it's like super duper great just because of how low the deck diversity is. I'm just repeating myself at this point. I don't know. I think the Ishizu cards are absolutely the problem here. Like, I think if the Ishizus weren't around, tiers would absolutely still be strong. Probably would still be a tier 1, if not that, a high tier 2 deck. But we would definitely see a lot more diversity in this meta. Especially with the way that, like, things have just been adjusted and hit in Master Duel. Like, we were seeing a pretty decent metagame, even with, like, I don't know, I think there was a place for Sprites to be a part of a healthy metagame. It's just that, you know, they first came out and Runic Sprite was rampantly powerful, then Ishizu stuff came out, and, like, Pure Sprite was the best deck, but it didn't feel unfair, but that, like, much like the Mathmech meta, was a relatively short one. It was about exactly 4 weeks before then we got tier limits, and then now things have just kind of exploded thus far. But I think this is ultimately where my tier list is going to land. So what do you think? Where do you like each of these individual formats? How would you rank them? Feel free to tell me how much you disagree with my rankings. Again, this is all subjective, entirely my opinion, but if you would like to voice your opinion, definitely am not opposed to that. So, yeah, definitely let me know what you think in the comments. And I think without further ado, that's going to go ahead and do it for this one. So let's move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There, for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack, you'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation. You do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But That's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is Hexlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.